You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender, and today we're talking about spitting. People who spit in public can now be prosecuted after a London council won a landmark legal ruling. In late September, Thames Magistrate Court agreed with Waltham Forest Council that spit was a form of litter. Two men, who had refused to pay an £80 fixed penalty notice given to them by the council, were each ordered to pay the original fine plus legal fees, bringing the total cost to £300 each. Waltham Forest has been issuing spitting fines since February this year and says the measure has the support of the public. It also has the support of Communities Secretary Eric Pickles, who says spitting on Britain's streets is not socially acceptable. But the move has stirred debate. For example, is saliva, which is mostly water, really litter? Does this open the door for more fines against other behaviour deemed socially unacceptable, such as swearing in public? And is this just going to be exploited by cash-strapped councils as another way to raise money? With me in the studio to discuss this is Peter Foote, chairman of the National Campaign for Courtesy. And joining us on the line are Clyde Lokes, a Waltham Forest councillor, Josie Appleton, director of the Manifesto Club, which is a civil liberties group, and Ross Coomber, a sociologist at Plymouth University who has researched spitting around the world. So, Clyde Lokes, I'll start with you. You're running the Don't Mess with Waltham Forest campaign. Tell us why you're cracking down on spitting and what the reaction has been.
We're cracking down on spitting because our residents have asked us to do something about it. In many focus groups, they've said some of the things that really annoy them when they're in their town centres and walking down their streets is some of the really unpleasant activities of people hoiking up huge amounts of phlegm and launching it in any direction they feel that they can. And we just think that that's disrespectful for our local communities. We don't think, some of our residents really should have to put up with that. And so we're trying to stamp it out. And, it's been, really, really welcomed by our residents. And not just in Waltham Forest, across London, across the country. The amount of calls and emails and positive comments we've had has been truly remarkable.
Peter Foote, presumably as chairman of the National Campaign for Courtesy, this is something that you would support?
Yes, we condemn anything which is really going to cause offence and disrespect to people that are sort of in the vicinity of this sort of action. And the other thing, of course, is that I take it from Councillor Lokes' point that it is also a health hazard.
Josie Appleton, what's your reaction to this sort of spitting crackdown?
I think that spitting is rude, or it can be, if not for sporting or medical reasons or something like that. But I think that courtesy is not really enforced by the law. The criminal law is not there to make us polite to each other. It's to deal with serious harms, violence, theft, those sorts of things. And I think that courtesy is extremely important, but that it lies within that domain of self-regulation and morality, and that actually only really can be effectively enforced by those forms of pressure, of disapproval, and those sorts of things. To take the law into that domain, I think, is ineffective. It's an invasion of liberty, and at the end of the day, it's really not the business of a fining official to teach us to be polite to each other.
All right, I'll definitely pick up on some of those points in a minute, but I just want to come to Ross Coomber, who is perhaps Britain's preeminent expert on spitting. Ross, what made you start studying spitting?
Well, a number of things, but the initial impetus was about 14 years ago in southeast London, where I used to live. I saw a couple of young girls spitting on the pavement and realised straight away that from an academic point of view, I was looking at something that was more than just a disgusting habit. It was imbued with a range of meaning for those particular girls. They had a certain attitude that they were expelling. They were part of a peer group where it was acceptable. It had some territorial aspects to it. And therefore, what I was looking at was something a little bit more than someone clearing their throat.
And is spitting socially acceptable anywhere else in the world?
Spitting is socially acceptable in many places around the world for billions of people. In China, spitting is so prolific and so common that it's just an everyday practice for most of the individuals there.
What about spitting in the UK? When did it become a taboo here?
Spitting was acceptable right up until probably the middle of the 19th century and acceptable in many classes into the 20th century. And in fact, the Truman industry that used to build pubs, they were in fact building pubs with spitting troughs at the root of their bars, even into the 1930s. So you can imagine that spitting was still acceptable in certain locations for certain people right into the middle of the last century.
And finally, just before I come to the other guest, I think Peter Foote said that spitting was unhygienic. I mean, in your research, have you found that spitting is a kind of health risk?
There's almost no evidence to suggest that public spitting, particularly in well-ventilated areas, which most public spitting is, it's outside, is at the very most a very negligible health risk. It's something where there literally is almost no evidence whatsoever. And we shouldn't confuse the fact that you can have certain diseases or viruses contained within spittle, but that's not the same thing as them being easily transmitted in that way. For example, we know that HIV transmits almost negligibly through spit, even though it's contained in that spit.
All right, so there we are. We're all a little wiser about spitting around the world now. But Clyde Lokes, I mean, Waltham Forest, obviously, is there a hygiene ground to your kind of crackdown, or is it really about morality, as we've heard?
For us, it is about the antisocial behaviour. And just as other organic matter can be enforced against, for example, dog mess, so we're doing the same with spit. And let's be clear, these are people that we're going after who actually hoik up and launch their spit into other people's faces, across other people. We've had complaints of parents whose children, actually get covered in some ghastly gunk lifted off of people's chests. This is an incredibly antisocial, disrespectful behaviour. And in our town centres, on our residential streets, our residents are saying they don't want to see it, they don't want to hear it because the noises are pretty horrendous as well, and they don't expect to have to clear up after it, and they want someone to do something about it. Just leaving it to just polite manners like the Manifesto Club would suggest hasn't cracked it, because if it had, we wouldn't be getting these complaints in, and we wouldn't have to be classifying it as antisocial behaviour and using fixed penalty notices to deal with it. I
mean, for example, a lot of people go out running or they cycle. I, for example, cycle all the time, and they feel the need to spit. Is this covered, or are you talking, as you say, literally about an antisocial form of spitting as opposed to any other form of spitting?
I think most people, I'm a regular cyclist, I never feel the need to spit. I know plenty of joggers who never feel the need to spit. I know plenty of people, should they feel the need to spit, that's why they carry a handkerchief. That's why one of the reasons why handkerchiefs were invented, and still why so many people carry a handkerchief. So there are plenty of ways of dealing with any excess spit that you have in your mouth that you feel the need to discharge in such a way as to not cause great offence to residents in Waltham Forest. And, you know the sorts of people that we're going after. They launched this disgusting, vile gunk after lifting it from their chest into the path of others. And I'm sorry, the good residents, the 99.99999% of good residents in Waltham Forest should not have to put up with that. And they've come to the council. We didn't kind of invent this campaign. They've come to the council and said, we want you to do something about this. You did some great things on reducing fly tipping, some great things on reducing a number of other enviro crime and antisocial behaviour issues, but we want you to do something about spitting. And we've looked at what we could do. We try in the FPN notice, and now the courts have upheld our definition. We're really, really pleased, and it has been tremendous, the support that we've had, not just in Waltham Forest and London, but across the country. And we can very easily see this being rolled out to many, many other parts of the country as a consequence. And enough is enough. People should learn to respect their town centres, respect their neighbours, and respect the people that they walk next to. They should not have the opportunity to cover people in spit. It's disgusting.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender, and we're talking about spitting. With me are Peter Foote, chairman of the National Campaign for Courtesy, Clyde Lokes, a Waltham Forest councillor, Josie Appleton, director of the Manifesto Club, and Ross Coomber, a sociologist at Plymouth University. Josie Appleton, surely actually spitting on another person should be punishable.
Yeah, but I think it probably would be under the various assault and harassment laws we already have. spitting in another person's face is very different from a jogger spitting into a flower bed or someone else spitting into a drain pipe. I think that in those latter cases, there's no harm done to an actual person. It may be rude, and that may be how it was intended, or it may not be. It may just be a jogger clearing their chest, and they do it in the most convenient manner possible. It being far more disgusting to spit into a hanky and have it festering in your pocket. Really, a flub into a flower bed does no one any harm at all. There's no victim of that crime. So I think that spitting in someone's face is a form of assault, and we have very actually overbroad laws under which that can be prosecuted. I think the idea of leaving it to politeness, it's not about leaving it to politeness. It's to say that, look, there's a whole large category of social life which people behave in particular ways, not because they're afraid of someone issuing them with a fine. And that includes letting people off the train, letting old ladies sit down, treating people with respect and decency. And those things are very important. But we behave in that way because we respect other people, not because we think if we don't, then someone's going to issue us with a fine. And once you actually take officialdom into that role, I think you actually degrade that whole sphere of morality and etiquette. And actually, ultimately, it's not going to work. Those kids are not going to respect people because they've been fined 300 quid. They're not going to have greater respect for their elders. They're not going to stop doing it. It's going to actually make the problem worse. So I think it's a kind of gesture of politics that really makes the problem worse at the end of the day.
What do you think is the best way to improve public respect, as it were?
Well, I think let's not make too much out of spitting. The decline of public respect is a very big and very grave problem, and that runs through those young people's lives in every aspect: the way they treat their teachers, the way they treat adults they meet in the street, the way they think of themselves. The idea that it can be reduced to the fact that they occasionally spit into a gutter is to really trivialise the problem. And I think the decline of public respect is a problem, and it's something that can only be tackled at the level of that problem, which is to do with morality, adults stepping in, being role models for children in those sorts of ways. And I think that right now we have a hands-off approach to young people, and so when they misbehave in public, everyone looks the other way, and that foments and creates a greater problem. And so I think let's not make too much out of spitting. It's not the be all and the end all. It's not really the worst thing that's happening in Waltham Forest. There are lots of more bigger problems in Waltham Forest, but it's almost the only level at which local authorities can intervene. And also, it's also free for local authorities and makes them a bit of money, which I think is quite welcome in these times, to be able to do something which you say you're improving people's lives, but actually it's really a gesture politics rather than kind of substantial improvement.
Well, I'll come to Clyde Lokes on that in a minute, but I just want to ask Peter Foote, just speaking quite broadly, do you think there is a sort of crisis of public respect here and that spitting is a symptom of that, or not really?
Well, I agree with Josie that we shouldn't make too big a thing of this, but the driver that brought me to the studio today had just come back from China. And to take up Ross's point that it was very prevalent in India, my driver just said, it's rife in China. It's just happening all the time. And I would hate to think that we would go that way. It would be keeping some sort of proportion about it. But I would just like to ask Ross on one point. People who play strenuous sport and it's at a rapid pace, and I'm thinking of perhaps footballers or people that run the marathon, is it a natural thing for phlegm to sort of develop and needs to be ejected? I mean, they're not carrying handkerchiefs with them, of course. So spitting would seem to be acceptable in those senses, or necessary, perhaps.
Yeah, Ross Coomber, I wanted to ask the same thing, because I indeed, when I cycle, do sometimes feel the need to spit. I mean, why do people doing sport, although, of course, Clive Lokes has said that he doesn't, so perhaps it differs from person to person, but, I mean, is it the case that athletes commonly need to spit, and we see it on the TV the whole time? I mean, why do you think that is?
I think it's a heady mix of culture and need at times. It has, I've no doubt, become more acceptable on television in recent years than it was 10, 15 years ago when footballers were filmed spitting all the time. I remember there used to be far more outcry than there is about it now. So we have this paradox whereby sports stars, very much in the public eye, can be spitting, and more or less it's become acceptable, whereas certain groups are being arguably targeted at the local level, because I don't think we're really talking about the average middle-class cyclist or the average middle-class runner who, in my terminology, often practices what I'd call socially responsible spitting. There's different types of spitting. People do spit on the floor in front of other people, but that's fairly rare. It's more likely that someone, even the young lads that I think we're talking about, that when they do spit, they do so sometimes a bit noisily, but they don't often do it right in front of somebody's feet or indeed on people. And it's even rarer for people to spit at people unless they're actually being aggressive in a way that takes it beyond the realms of spitting anyway.
Clyde Lokes, are you going to wander onto the pitch at Leyton Orient FC and dish out fixed penalty notices to all the players of Leyton Orient?
No, I'm certainly not. I have to keep bringing this back to a sense of proportionality here. We all know the sorts of people that we're going after with this. And I'm sorry. When
yes,
you go
Clyde. Yes, Clyde. Who are those people?
Primarily young people, primarily men. Who hang around. They hang around at bus stops, dripping out spit at the bus stop. They launch their phlegm in our town centres, and just that, that wrong bit of wind will mean that phlegm ends up on someone's pram. These are the real issues that we're dealing with in Waltham Forest. I do think the cyclist, the runner thing is just a slight distraction. And just going to come back to the other point around an attempt to make money out of this. I think that does the residents of Waltham Forest a great injustice to suggest that we're engaging in jester politics here. This is something our residents asked us to come up with an intervention to deal with in Waltham Forest. And they asked us to deal with it because it is something that is important to them. To belittle and to demean them, as has been suggested, I think is actually quite outrageous. And the amount of support that we've had from across the country since we had these particular court cases come through has been absolutely tremendous. And if it raises the debate, if it actually starts to encourage people to challenge a few people around this, if it actually starts to see a reduction in this, then that is a great and very positive thing. But this is not about money, and actually it is incredible how some people just feel the need. Every time the council does something positive for its local community, for its residents, they suggest it's just another money-making issue. It certainly is not. We want to drive this antisocial behaviour out of our town centres and out of our borough, and that is our aim.
Well, let's talk about money for a minute. I mean, isn't £80 a bit steep for somebody who's spat on the floor or something like that? That's quite a lot of money, isn't it?
That's the standard fixed penalty notice fine, and if they pay it straight away, it goes down. These two individuals didn't pay, they challenged it, and as a consequence, they end up paying a lot more.
But you're talking about, one of the guys is 18 years old. £80 could be quite a lot of money for him. Might it, if you're going to go around finding a lot of people who perhaps don't have a job in the first place, are reeling from a sort of a rising cost of living, are finding their personal circumstances quite tough and don't know easily how the system works, how to engage with it, and then face hundreds of pounds, where are they going to get that money from? And aren't you risking causing more problems than you solve? Aren't you kind of creating
Everyone knows that spitting is a disgusting thing that doesn't need to happen. They all know that. They make a decision when they do that to either disregard other people's personal space or disregard their own community when they do it. The individual that you're referring to, the 18-year-old, I believe, is in Her Majesty's pleasure currently, also, I think, for burglary charges. So, let's not be too quick to jump to the defence of these individuals. These individuals are those that not great adverts for our communities at the present time.
But they are in your communities, and as a result, you have a kind of a responsibility to them as well.
Well, we do have a responsibility for them, but we have a responsibility to the 99.999% of people that say, don't do this. This isn't something that is genetically programmed into you, that when you're born you immediately start hoiking up huge amounts of gunk from your chest and just launching it into other people's space. This is something you decide to do, an individual decides to do. And if you do that in Waltham Forest, you will face a consequence if we observe it and if we catch you. And we will observe and we will catch.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender, and today we're talking about spitting. Peter Foote, you want to come in here?
Yes, I would, actually. Councillor Lokes, Given Ross's point that some people need to spit more than others, I expect you'd want them to use a handkerchief or something, or a tissue or something like that. Have you got sufficient number of rubbish bins situated locally in the high streets and so on to actually take the offending results?
I can assure you we've got a lot of street bins,
All sited by bus stops where people stand and then...
Yes. You're more than welcome to come and see our street bins. We've got a lot of street bins. Has never been an issue in Waltham Forest because we take issues around the public realm and what our streets look like so seriously.
All right, so we're reassured about the number of bins in Waltham Forest. But Josie Appleton, do you fear to some extent that by fining some forms of antisocial behaviour, we could end up opening the floodgates for a whole raft of measures against the way people behave in the public space, such as, say, swearing or queue jumping?
I think very much so, and I think there is a real sleight of hand here in Waltham Forest's use of litter laws. To the extent that I would actually say it's illegal. I know it's been enforced by a magistrate's court and been confirmed by a magistrate's court, but I don't think it's in the spirit of the rule of law to interpret spit as litter. Something that's largely water, that if it's left in a flower bed, leaves absolutely no trace, you'd be difficult to find it afterwards. To call that litter, I think, is really stretching the law to the point of actually being illegal and really going this against the spirit of the fact that crimes are defined tightly in law and then they're enforced. I think what Waltham Forest has done in this case is really they've wanted to crack down on spitting, and rather than go through the proper way of bringing through a bylaw, they've essentially looked for a law that they can punish it under, and that's really not the proper way of going about things. To go and look for a law you can get.
Sorry, Clyde Lokes, could we just let Josie Appleton finish her point, please?
So I think that's one thing. I think it's a real sleight of hand to use litter laws in this way, and I'm very disappointed that magistrates have confirmed that interpretation. It's certainly not the view of DEFRA guidance, which says that small items should not be classed as litter. They give the example of orange peel. Now, spit is a long way down the list from orange peel. It's certainly not the view of the Department for Local Communities and Local Government. When I told them that some councils were classifying spit as litter, they said that's crazy. That's not what this law is intended for. So I think that's one point. I think the second point, though, is that he says that his residents are very concerned about this. Now, I'm sure there are lots of things. I used to live in Waltham Forest. I'm sure there are lots of things that residents are very concerned about. The state of the roads, state of the nurseries, the irregularity of rubbish collection from households. There are lots of things people are concerned about. When I made the point about money making, my point was that in a way this is something that can be done on the cheap. You know, it's very cheap to punish people or to ban something. It's very easy to crack down in this way. It costs what? It costs, I don't know, nothing, and you make a little bit out of it. So actually, the things that people are very concerned about that would require a real investment of resources or time or effort, in a way. Councils are unable to respond to those concerns. The concerns they can respond to are these kind of symbolic concerns. So yes, you have declining neighbourhoods, high unemployment. Those kids are partly disrespectful because they have no future, they have no jobs to go to. You have all these real social problems, and what you say is, the one thing we can do is we can ban spitting, we can find someone who's in prison already. So what's the point in? How's he going to pay £300 when he's 18 and in prison? It's just it's insane that this would solve anything at all. But that's the one thing that a local authority can do, is crack down in that way, and that's why I say it's symbolic gesture politics, because of all the problems in a neighbourhood like Waltham Forest, and there are many and various. This is the one thing that the council says they can do, and really it doesn't improve people's lives. And essentially, you've made a show trial out of two young men, which is not going to increase youth respect, and it is quite futile in those cases. They're not going to be able to pay that fine.
So a couple of points here for Clyde Lokes to come back on.
Can I just make a point? It's Ross here. It's potentially gesture politics in other ways, because there are councils, I think Clyde is correct, that lots of councils around the country are getting interested, and there's been lots of support for this, but in my experience, it is the case that it's one of those issues that if you ask anybody in the UK what they think about spitting, and even the spitters and almost everybody will say it's disgusting. They are disgusted by it. And would they support people being made to stop it in some form or another, or prevent it in some form? And they would nearly all agree with that. But that doesn't necessarily have very much bearing on whether there's a great deal of spitting that actually is going on around any of those individuals. It's something that they're not keen on and they would like to see stopped, but it doesn't mean that they experience very much of it. And one example of this is Edinburgh Council, who have announced that they are going to have a debate on whether to introduce fines for spitting. And one of their councillors came on the radio and said, yes, this is something we're going to do. But he said, it's interesting because we've never actually received a single complaint about spitting. And I just think that, there's a level at which we have to appreciate that it is probably the case that there's never been a time in British history where there's been less spitting.
Clyde Lokes, a couple of points for you to respond on there.
We stood back and we've been waiting for a couple of councils to progress the bylaws on spitting bans. Enfield Council that borders Waltham Forest, has so far spent 3 years trying to progress a bylaw to ban spitting. Now, that's a ridiculously large amount of time on something where their residents clearly felt that there was an issue and the council wanted to respond. Not only that, with a bylaw, of course, you have to take each individual through a court process. So it becomes an incredibly expensive, inefficient way of dealing with a particular problem at a time when the public purse is incredibly stretched. Why would you waste court time and council time on progressing something like that? Well, you wouldn't. Not when you can issue a fixed penalty notice. And I'm sorry, the DEFRA guidance is so vague on litter that we have been able to test it out. And we've tested it out and we've got a legal view on that. And for Josie to now suggest that it's illegal actually pours scorn on the legal process in this country, I would suggest. But that is a fast, effective way of dealing with an issue that our residents believe is important to them. They don't want the public purse wasting huge amounts of time on chasing it. They want that quick, effective form of justice. And the vast majority of individuals that we have caught spitting in Waltham Forest since we started this process have paid up straight away because they know they've been caught red-handed doing something that they shouldn't be doing.
All right. Well, we've run out of time, unfortunately. I just want to come for a last word to Ross Coomber, who is Britain's preeminent expert on spitting. I mean, you've heard all the points of view expressed here today. How is this new ban on spitting influencing public attitudes, and where do you think we're headed with regard to spitting?
Well, I think it's influencing public attitudes quite a bit. I think people get very upset about spitting, as I said before. I think that in the long run, it'll probably make very little difference, as it really is probably an almost unenforceable activity. It may help to remind some members of the public that it's best if they spit that they do so into, as Josie has said, into flower beds or into the curb, into the road, down drains, and certainly not in front of other people. But for many of the groups that it is that the councillor is concerned about, I'd be very surprised if it has much impact on them at all.
All right, I'd like to thank my guests. In the studio was Peter Foote, chairman of the National Campaign for Courtesy. And on the phone we had Clyde Lokes, a Waltham Forest councillor who is spearheading the Don't Mess with Waltham Forest campaign, Josie Appleton, director of the Manifesto Club, a civil liberties group, and Ross Coomber, a sociologist at Plymouth University who has researched spitting around the world. Thank you all very much.